Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 3 of the Coarse Grind podcast. My name is Sean Rosser, host, creator, and so on. Good to see you. Good to have you back. If you're a return listener, I really do appreciate it. With me this evening for episode numero tres, she's a native Chicagoan. She's always been into not only food, but awesome influences one wouldn't expect, such as punk, metal, and pro wrestling. Combination I'm certainly a massive fan of. She's an innovator. Marrying things in my admitted ignorance I wouldn't normally entertain, like vegan and baking, but does it with such a flash and a style and an edge that honestly it would probably make someone like, I don't know, CM Punk, name drop, beg for mercy. And that was absolutely as cheap of a name drop as I could make. By far and away, she is one of the most notable food personas I've ever had the pleasure of following, and I'm in good company, as she has appeared locally on WTTW Chicago, as well as on the Cooking Channel and Food Network. Author, baker, and someone who, as she's quoted, just doesn't give a shit about your coupons, gluten-free pancake mixes, or chef interviews. But she's totally doing one for me right now. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, the incomparable Natalie Slater. Natalie, how are you this evening?
Wow, I'm good, but my head is huge now.
Excellent, and it very well should be. It very well should be. I was looking at the timeline of your career with Bake and Destroy, and I think it was around 2006, 2007. I stumbled upon this site, and I was really taken aback. I'm like, okay, Bake and Destroy. There's clearly a shout out to Skate and Destroy, if I may be so bold as to assume that. And it's correct. Dealing with food. And upon further investigation, like not only food, but really clean food, vegan, like this totally blew my mind and really began for me a trip down looking at alternative means of cooking. So, yeah, that's how I kind of stumbled upon you and why I'm flattered that you considered doing the show this evening. So, again, thank you so very much. Purpose of this evening isn't really to just...
You're welcome.
I'm sorry? Oh, sure. Thank you. Purpose of this evening, I don't want to talk about all the shows and all the stuff. The Coarse Grind podcast is really to get into who the person is behind the food. I think so often we lose food as an art form and we look at it more as a staple for sustenance, survival, and nothing more. I think there's more to it than that. And really with somebody like you, you make it truly an art form. So I want to know about where you came from, how you came to where you are, and where you're going next with it. So with your permission,
sure. Without
further ado, where did Natalie Slater grow up eating? Where did she grow up eating? What did she grow up eating?
Well, I grew up in Joliet, which is a city just about 45 minutes south of Chicago. So it's a very scrappy kind of blue collar city. It considers itself really the far, far south side of Chicago. And my mom was a working mom, and my dad always worked pretty tough hours at his job too. So we had a lot of kind of quickie dinners that my mom could throw together. And as soon as I was old enough to reach the knobs on the oven and on the stove, I was making dinner for my sister and brother. So I definitely didn't grow up cooking, but the one thing that my mom did always make sure that she had time for was to bake for us. And it wasn't always just a special occasion like a birthday. Sometimes it was just like, it's Friday, work's done. I'm going to whip together some cookies. We're going to watch a movie. And those are some of the happiest memories that I have from being a kid, was kind of sitting on the counter with my mom and measuring out ingredients for her and just kind of watching the magic of sugar and flour and a few other things coming together into a treat. So that's really kind of where it got started.
Man, and if that answer doesn't warm people's hearts, I don't think anything will. That's that's awesome. That's awesome. And now, especially as a mom, excuse me, I'm sure you appreciate it that much more.
Oh, I mean, definitely. I totally relate to how busy my mom was, and we're kind of in the same situation, we try to do as much prep as we can on Sunday so that there's always something good and healthy when we all come together for dinner. But those are definitely the special times too with my son and I, is when, everything's kind of done, we can settle in and we have time to make some cookies or do something like that. And he's a big fan of homemade bread, so we always make sure that we have some fresh bread around. But it's definitely, it all comes full circle. Now it's me with him, so it is definitely special.
Right on. That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned these really cool, really, home heartfelt memories of the bacon growing up. Growing up, what kind of eater were you? Were you a picky eater?
No, actually, I was a pretty adventurous little eater because my grandparents took me everywhere when I was a kid. My grandpa worked in nuclear power, so he traveled a lot, and my grandma went with him. And so whenever I had a break from school, they sent my parents plane tickets, and off I went to Georgia or to deep, southern Maryland or up in Massachusetts or wherever there was a power plant that needed a valve specialist. That's where I was, and I was always eating. My grandma is a big food lover, and especially traveling as much as she got to, she always liked to find whatever was kind of the local specialty. So, visiting all of those cities, I definitely got treated to some pretty special food. And I was definitely a chubby little kid, so I can't say I was very picky. I always had a sweet tooth, and my grandma indulged it like crazy. So there were always
No, do
like,
they do that? Grandmas indulge
oh
sweet
yeah.
teeth?
It was partially me and it was partially her too, though, because when I got a treat, she got a treat. So we were both a little bit naughty, but I'm happy to say we're both much healthier eaters now.
Good, good. But clearly you can still enjoy those sweet things, as I've seen from several of your recipes recently. I think that there was an
Oh,
almond joy
sure.
one, wasn't there? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
that's
actually
honestly. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh no. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a fun one that I got to share from a brand new raw vegan cookbook that's out there, or I guess that would be an uncookbook.
Mhm.
But yeah, gluten-free raw vegan candy bars. But it's definitely now with kind of, all the people out there developing interesting techniques and all of the great healthy ingredients that so many people have easy access to these days, that you can still indulge and have something sweet and something special, and not kind of not be too naughty.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and obviously, as education comes more into the forefront of nutrition, people are looking for those outs, and I really think your voice, among many others, would be raw and vegan movement for that matter, are definitely pushing the envelope, and in your introduction, I have to fess up as ignorant that I would have never looked at an almond joy of all things and said, we can totally make this vegan. And yet, sure enough, there it was on Facebook the other day, and I went, wait a minute, this could work. This could really work.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
Yeah,
So,
and I shared there was an Oreo one too that Oreos are already in the US, at least they are vegan, but they're vegan because they're made with just chemical sludge. There's
yeah,
not really an identifiable food ingredient on the list. So yeah, it's definitely just getting back to real ingredients, and you can manipulate them in a way that makes them just as satisfying as kind of the junk that you might crave.
cool, absolutely. Hey, you mentioned earlier on, the baking memories with your mom. Is there one particular thing that she would make that when you think of it takes you home? Is there one thing in particular? One baked good,
Yes,
one pastry? What's that?
absolutely. And I actually did a version of this in my book where I kind of veganized it, but my mom made these cookies that were super easy to throw together, but it was basically German chocolate cake mix and a couple of other ingredients, like some rolled oats and some chocolate chips, and they baked up to be these really like gooey, chewy, kind of light chocolate cookies, and they were the absolute best. And I have a little sister and a little brother, and there was me and my dad and my mom. And a batch would be gone in about a half hour. So it was always a treat to be there when she was making it because I got dibs. But that's like, I mean, I would consider that like my mom's signature sweet from when I was a kid. So I was determined to find a way to make it for my book.
And German chocolate cake, that's no joke. That's a heavy hitter. And there again, I out of just sheer ignorance wouldn't think that could work that way. But man, I'm sure if it's in your book, it's probably killer. Right on. So I think we might have already answered the next question. But growing up, your biggest culinary influence was clearly mom.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, my mom and my grandma, because I spent so much time with both of them, and my mom's definitely a baker, and my grandma is definitely a cook. She will start her spaghetti sauce at like noon so that it's perfect by dinner time, because it's a labor intensive sort of process. It's got lots of things that need to be precisely put in at precisely the right time, and she is a phenomenal cook. So I would say between the two of them, that's definitely kind of where I got my start and where I learned all the basics.
Cool. And so, taking from your mom and your grandma, who clearly, made you realize, like, man, food is this really deep spiritual thing. Was there a moment growing up where you realized that food is going to be something I do? Like, food is going to be a thing that I really focus my life on?
I think that's actually kind of one of the funnier things about what Bake and Destroy has kind of ended up being, is that I never had that thought. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer. And when I got a little bit older, I wanted to be a writer. And that's what I ended up going to school for. And in the end was writing. But while I was in college, I worked in a bakery, and then I worked in several other restaurants. And the whole time, never for a second thinking, what I'm doing now is my passion. This is what I want to do. It was just sort of a thing I did. And it wasn't really until I was, a new mom, and I had a little baby at home and kind of lots of downtime between naps and everything else. And I started just sort of getting bored and, kind of going back to some of the things I used to make when I was working in the bakery, things that my mom used to make, things I had with my grandma, and then just kind of playing around with ingredients and pulling inspiration from different places. Like a song might sort of spiral my imagination into like, what would they like, what would be like the brownie version of this song or something like that, and just playing around with it. And it wasn't until I kind of did it for myself that it became a real passion and something that I, kind of decided to start writing about and eventually put a book out about.
Right on. Yeah, and you mentioned that when you became a mom, that's when you really started to look back at it. And I do think I'm trying to place a timeline, because I'm a dad of three, God help me. And if I recall, it was around the time that I first became a dad, because I've got a 6-year-old, and on the timeline, yours is like 6 or 7, yeah. So that would
he's actually
match up.
Yeah, he'll turn 8 in a week.
Oh, right on. So
yeah,
and I can almost remember the exact Twitter post, and it was from Twitter. I first caught up with you, and I saw the site, and a very, very, kind of small scale back then, but just to think that parenting, gave you that focus to kind of play it forward. Because so many times you talk with somebody in the food industry and they're like, oh, well, I was 5 and I was alongside my grandmother in an Italian kitchen on the hillside. Some people, it's greater later. And I think in your case, that certainly holds true.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I guess, it's like one of two things kind of happens when you become a parent. You either discover all of these things about yourself that you never knew were there, and you kind of charge forward and you turn into the person that, you know, you were meant to be, or you kind of lose the person that you are and perhaps lose the person that you wanted to be. I've definitely seen it happen where, you know, especially moms, they sacrifice so much that, you know, sometimes a little bit later in life, there might be a little bit of regret. And I was really fortunate that when I became a mom and I started sort of seeing myself in a different way and understanding how much I was capable of that I never knew I could do, that I, you know, was married to a person who definitely pushed me along and encouraged me, and was always willing to, you know, do more than his fair share to make sure that I could, you know, kind of pursue the things I wanted to. I don't think a lot of people with a 10-month-old baby would necessarily be like trekking out, you know, 3 states away to like judge a pie contest or something like that. But I was able to do things like that because my husband, you know, saw how much I was kind of like growing and really appreciating, you know, being older and being, you know, having kind of more to consider in the world than just myself. So, I was lucky in that way. And I think a lot of moms too, there's like a whole movement of just like, you know, kind of mom entrepreneurs out there, and with the popularity of Etsy and, you know, just things like that, I feel like that more and more women are kind of, getting that creative spark when they become mothers. And now we have all these amazing outlets to kind of, you know, you can blog about it, you can make videos, you can sell your stuff online. Like it's really great. It's a really fortunate time for new parents all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's phenomenal. That's awesome. So those were the starter questions. Those were the, you know, where did Natalie Slater, where did Bake and Destroy come from? Now we're going to move on to the mains, where you are right now. And currently, now we're not talking about growing up, you know, the mom and the grandma, but currently, where do you draw your culinary inspiration from the most? Person, thing, concept?
Honestly, now it's really kind of, I'm really inspired by all of these kind of niche blogs that are out there. There's, you know, there's blogs like This Rawsome Vegan Life and, you know, Oh She Glows and Happy Herbivore. And there's a ton of them that have really sort of taken this whole like healthy, natural, vegan, you know, in some cases raw kind of food, and made it super accessible and fun. And you know, it doesn't feel like a chore, and it doesn't feel like you are necessarily getting an education or anything like that. It's just like a new way of thinking about food. So I'm definitely inspired by other food writers, and I'm lucky enough to get like tons of cookbooks mailed to me for review and things like that. And so I'm always just like blown away by what people are doing with really wholesome ingredients. And especially in the vegan world, people are, it's like they're mad scientists. I have a book called Artisan Vegan Cheeses. It's like, I mean, I don't understand. Like, I feel like the author must have come from a different planet to have like uncovered these these like methods, and it's, and like the things I've made from it are stellar. So I'm just totally inspired by kind of all of the people out there, you know, writing blogs and writing cookbooks that are just kind of turning things on their head.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm totally going to go on record as admitting, my wife, in preparation for this podcast, got me some kale chips with a vegan spicy cheese on them, because I wanted to at least go into things today knowing I've at least ventured into that foray. And I'm going to tell you, it's not as scary. It's not as scary as you think. It's not. It's a cheese made with cashews, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to lie, I trembled in my boots as a typical knuckle dragging meat eater, but it really was good. It tasted really good. So I'm really excited to try more. And those references that you just made, the artisanal cheese is vegan. I'm certainly going to give them a go. I think it literally is the next like great foray, great movement in the culinary scene, and I certainly hope that's to be true. Now speaking of the vegan pursuits, over your career, what has been the greatest thing, concept, dish, what have you, that you have made? Like, what
That's a
is
good
the
question.
one thing you hang your hat on?
So this is very simple, but I have a nacho cheese sauce that I make, and it's really easy. It's cashews, nutritional yeast, some onion powder, garlic powder, salt, a little lemon juice, and a little pureed chipotle pepper and adobo. And it's really easy. It whips together in seconds. It is stellar. Like, I make myself sick off of it every time I make it. And it's one of those things that always kind of wins people over. It won my little brother over. He had never eaten any of my food from my recipes until my book launch party. And I had a big buffet table of tons of stuff from my book, and my brother, was like basically starving because he was scared to eat any of it. And then I just kind of shoved him over to the nacho section and he tried it. And the next day he texted me and was like, "We're making your nacho cheese tonight. We're going to make your barbecue jackfruit." Like, he started cooking out of the book. So I feel like that's kind of the whole point of Bake and Destroy, is that I take all the foods that are kind of loved by most everyone universally, like tacos and lasagna and nachos and, cheesy popcorn and things like that. And I've just kind of changed the ingredients around so that they're better for you and they're plant-based. And, but I know what those foods are supposed to taste like. I'm about as like down home as it gets. And I wouldn't tell you to eat nacho cheese if it didn't taste like nacho cheese. And it absolutely does. So I think that's one of those recipes that's like, it's like the gateway into trying other things. If I can win you over with that, then, I'm actually really impressed that you jumped straight into kale chips, because that's usually like, step 5 or 6.
Oh, step five. Okay. Of a how many step program are we talking here?
Oh, I don't know, maybe let's say 10.
Okay, at least. Yeah, no, she brought him home and I tried. Now, we're not an unhealthy family, but certainly, the animal-based protein is on our plate, a lot. And so
Sure.
I walked in a couple times, and there were a couple nights this week where I walked in full intent to open them, and I got scared. And then finally, I think it was actually Wednesday night. I'm like, you know what? Listen, you followed her for years. You've read her stuff. Clearly you want to not sound like a total uninformed idiot. Give them a go. And I mean, they ruled. I mean, they're not a potato chip. They're not,
Sure.
covered in cheese. But at the same time, if you focus on the taste, and I think so often we as a culture focus on so many more aspects than just taste and feel.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I did that, I'm like, no, this is really good. I could sit and eat way too many of these. So
Right,
it
which
worked out really great.
I love that about kale chips, is that it's kind of like the more you eat, like the better you're doing. So,
Yeah.
it's I don't know. Could you eat too many? I'm not really sure. I guess at some point you could probably do some damage, but I think it would take a lot.
I think if there's a human being on the planet that could pull it off, I think it might be me. Wild guess. So I'm actually going to skip over the next big thing in food, because I think we've actually identified that. And well, here, I'll pose the question differently. Normally,
Sure.
I ask chefs and cooks and so on, like, what's the next big thing? And I guess there was a movement recently, toast. Toast is like big shit in the field. And okay. Let me ask you a modified version of this question.
Sure.
Do you think vegan, plant-based, a more conscious way of eating will form the next big thing in food? Do you think it will be a force behind it? If so, how much?
I really honestly do. And not just because there's such an awakening of sort of the ethics behind where our food comes from, although that is definitely a growing force. And with the power of the internet, it's so easy for, that kind of stuff to get exposed and get spread around and really touch a lot of people. But I think beyond that, people are really starting to understand more and more that what they're eating is affecting them in so many ways. If you look at sort of the gluten-free movement, a very small fraction of people actually have celiac disease. It's mostly people that have intolerances, and those intolerances are coming from just sort of an overindulgence in wheat products. Like we're really overdoing it on wheat. And so people are suffering from like inflammatory issues or digestive issues or just sort of an overall kind of feeling of yuck, And so as they're kind of cutting back on those things, they're feeling better and better. My little sister had a lot of like joint problems. She quit eating red meat. She all of a sudden felt better. I think people are just more aware of kind of like how the sugar and the meat and the dairy and things like that are really affecting them, and that they can take simple steps to cut back or even cut out those things and not really change their lifestyle too much and overall feel better. And so I really do think that vegan and maybe plant-based will be sort of how it's positioned to make it a little bit less sensitive for people. But I do think that that is the next big thing. And I think going back to sort of the artisan vegan cheese idea, I was keeping an eye on the Natural Products Expo that was going on all weekend. And some of the kind of the most consistent new products that I saw rolling out were like nut-based alternatives or other sort of plant-based alternatives to lots of dairy products. So lots of different kinds of non-dairy milks, tons of non-dairy cheeses, non-dairy yogurts. And these are definitely, some of these are big companies behind these products. So it's not just sort of the hippies and the tree huggers and the vegans. It's like the big food companies are starting to see kind of the profitability in these foods too. So I do feel like we'll see more and more options in restaurants. And I live in Chicago, and a new vegan restaurant opens probably every 6 months here. I mean, we have them in every neighborhood at this point, and my neighborhood has 3 on one street. So I definitely think that it's just going to keep becoming more and more mainstream, which is great because it means that I can eat more and more. So couldn't be happier about that.
I mean, what could possibly be wrong with that? I completely agree. There's such a new focus on proteins, and I mean, I'm relatively physically active, and so I like to read up on where to get my protein from. And there's been a lot of report. It seems actually this past week, I'd like to think it's coincidence, they knew I was going to be interviewing you, where they would bring up, the faults behind getting your protein from an animal source as opposed to a tree nut or something like that. So I think that's very interesting. I think it definitely holds a lot of promise. And, the more and more we live, the healthier we get. Life expectancy continues to grow. And I think it's because we think more, and, you're striking the nail right on the head with that being hopefully a movement that catches steam. So career-wise,
I really
you have
think
this
so.
Cool. Career-wise, you have this wonderful Bake and Destroy site, which I'm going to plug the living hell out of throughout this. So, that's one thing. But what's next? Like Natalie Slater, Bake and Destroy, obviously cookbook, site, blog, all these things. But what's the next step? What's the 2-year? What's the 5-year?
Sure. I mean, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do another book necessarily because the first one was a pretty huge undertaking, although it couldn't have turned out better. It's like it fell directly out of my brain. It's exactly how I wanted it to look. Everything about it I'm in love with. So, I mean, my publisher did a great job. I just wasn't sure if I really wanted to sort of dedicate a full year to doing that again, but I did get a pretty pretty great idea not too long ago, and now I have a little bit more time available to me to kind of work on it. So I do think that book number 2 is in my future. And I've been kind of there's a company here in Chicago that does tons of work on like web shows and podcasts and things like that. And I've had I feel like the written blog is kind of going the way of the dinosaurs. And so
Yes.
I'm definitely interested in pursuing, perhaps a podcast, maybe a webcast. I have kind of a funny idea for a webcast. And, now that my good friend CM Punk is out of the wrestling game, I would definitely love to kind of get him involved in that. So,
For sure.
I don't know. I think I'm gonna keep it up for a while. I think as long as people are interested, I'm gonna keep putting stuff out there. And when I feel like I've overstayed my welcome, then I'll just kind of peacefully back away and let somebody else take over.
Cool. Absolutely. God, that's so cool. So normally at this point, I transition into the last segment, but indulge me for a minute because I've got to know. I grew up Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, all this, and I have maybe a little bit relaxedly watched it over the past couple of years. CM Punk, is he really as just cool and down to earth as he seems?
Yeah, I mean, what you see
Nice.
is literally what you get. He is
I'm clapping to
not a
myself in my
character.
office
That
right
is
now.
really him.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, no,
That makes
he's
sense.
super like, my husband and I were laughing because, now it's the big controversy is that he's quit. He was unhappy for a very long time, and he made the decision that I think is going to be the best for him in the long run, and he's not going to do it anymore. And I had a lot of people say things to me about like, how could he say no to a WrestleMania payday and blah blah blah. Well, aside the fact that he's got plenty of money, he's just fine. Nobody needs to worry about Punk, how he's going to pay the rent. He's fine. But beyond that, he's still a Midwestern punk rocker at heart. He basically only wears shirts that he gets for free. He has like 2 pairs of pants. He gets 1 pair of shoes every year for his birthday, which I know because they come from my husband. He's the one that gives them to him. So like, he's not living beyond his means, which is one of the things that has kept us friends for so long because, he definitely has seen a lot of success and because of that, a lot of money in his career. And he just keeps it super real. He's very, very generous with his friends. He's definitely like treated me to way more dinners than I deserved, but he doesn't have like he just got his first new car in like 15 years. Like he's got a really great house. He travels, but he doesn't buy like extravagant dinners. He doesn't buy crazy, like he's not really like none of the things that people blow their money on. Like he's not interested in those things. He just wants to have like, a TV to watch old wrestling stuff on, and that's about it. So yeah, he's definitely exactly the guy that you see. I mean, I'll say he is a little bit nicer than the guy you see on TV, but not
I figured
all
as
the
much.
time. But
Ah, nice.
he still does have his moments. So
Yeah, sure. And I would never, and I think that's like the first and probably only time I'll ever jump off into a completely other topic. But man, as big as wrestling was, I always loved to know the humanity behind, and that's so cool. And I think you hit it right on the head again. Is that so many people forget. Like these are people with hearts and minds and souls, and leave them alone. They want to walk away, let them walk away. It's that simple.
yeah, I mean, I understand. Like, if I was a kid and like my favorite wrestler of all time was Roddy Piper. If he had just walked away on me as like a 7-year-old kid, I would feel really disappointed. And of course, I wouldn't know what his personal reasons were or anything like that. And if I at the time had Twitter, I might blow it up, like, kind of guilt tripping him about it or whatever. But in these days, like, we actually do know we have way too much access to people's personal lives now. And so I feel like, as sad as it is for fans, because he is really something special, I just think that they need to respect his decision and know that, I'm sure he'll be around in some way, whether he's a guest on Talking Dead or whatever. I don't think it's the last people will see of him.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And obviously you're the expert there. So again, totally deviating from the topic, but just I cannot possibly pass up an opportunity to ask that kind of a question.
Sure.
To somebody who would know. So the last segment of the podcast, the afters, the off the cuff, the oddball questions, if you will. So strap in, sit with me, and just answer them as it comes to you. So I'm standing in your kitchen. I'm standing in your kitchen in Chicago. Grew up a Cubs fan, by the way. So I'm in Chicago. I'm happy. What music do I hear?
Well, if you're in my kitchen, it's most likely the Cramps. That's my favorite baking music.
Awesome.
It's just kitschy enough to where I don't feel out of place making cookies, but it's, it's definitely fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Phenomenal. And in your kitchen now, again, the typical way, I say typical like I have a million episodes. I have 3. Shut up, Sean. But typically I'm asking chefs how their mouth would be in the kitchen at work. Now, you're a mom at home. How's your mouth? And we can answer this 2 ways. We can answer this when school's in session and when school's out of session. So,
well, the nice thing, and I'm sure you can relate, but one of the joys of having a boy is that you really don't have to filter yourself that much. By 8 years old, he's pretty much cussing at like a high school level. So, I don't watch myself. The only time I watch myself is when I'm around other people's kids, because I don't want to like break them, but but honestly, I'm calm. Like the kitchen is my happy place. Like there's no temper tantrums. I can totally see if I were working in a busy kitchen, or sometimes I help my friend Anna out at her bakery, Paper Moon Pastry, where we do these vegan markets, and it gets a little hectic back there, and there's definitely some cussing. But when I'm in my own kitchen, it's like total chillville.
Awesome. You're to be stranded on a deserted island. Just go with me here for a minute.
Okay.
You're sentenced to be on a deserted island, and you can only take 3 food items with you. That's not including potable water. You have all the water you need. What would those 3 items be, and why?
Let's see. I would probably take as many avocados as I could possibly carry and not worry too much about how I was going to keep them ripe. I would bring probably some kind of root vegetable, like maybe potatoes, so that I could plant them and grow more food. And I think also I love green onions, and they're really easy to grow, and they make everything taste better. So I think between potatoes and avocados and green onions, I would have a pretty sweet setup.
You completely have just provided the most unique answer I think this podcast will ever see in its life. It's always, champagne. And this is a question, just to give you the backdrop from it. Melanie Dinea has done 2 books, My Last Supper and the next Coarse, and I forget the formal title of it, but it's basically 50 like very, very famous chefs posed with one question. What would your last meal be, and why? And who would be there, and what music would be playing, and so on. And so with that in mind, Natalie Slater, your last meal, what would it be?
Oh boy. Let's see. I think the most comforting thing I have ever eaten in my life is my grandmother's spaghetti. There's just something absolutely magical about it. And so it would definitely be that with plenty of fresh Italian bread on the side. And I would want her and my grandpa and my husband and my son there with me because I think those are pretty much the four greatest, funniest people I know. And so that's who I'd want to share it with.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the final question to wrap it all up nicely in a neat little bow. What is food to you in a single word?
Love.
Nice. Nice. And obviously from your answer to the last meal, I mean, you can tell, and I mean, you can tell it throughout the entire, all your answers speak to that, as soon as you became a mom, just looking at that, as soon as you became a mom, this is where all this sprung from. So it's almost like not just a love for others, but a love of self.
Yeah, I mean, that's to me, it's how I know when somebody cares about me is, if they've taken the time to make me something or, at least that they know that there's something in particular that I love and they find it for me. And like, that's, it's an offering and it's super personal. And, that's, my best friends can say the same thing. Like we hardly ever see each other without some kind of little exchange of goodies. So I just think that it's one of the most sincere ways that you can tell another person that you care about them and that you're thinking of them is by cooking or baking or even just picking something up for them to enjoy. So food is absolutely love.
Food is love. Food is love indeed. Man, I'm looking at the time and I can't believe this much time has gone by, but that brings us to the end of the interview. Natalie, I cannot possibly begin to be more grateful for you doing the show with me this evening. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Are there any items, things, concepts, projects you're looking to plug tonight? If so, fire away.
Well, I mean, I'm still, posting recipes at bacondestroy.com and I'm, usually pretty active on Twitter and Tumblr and all sorts of things like that. So I would hope that anybody that's learning about me listening to this podcast would follow along.
Right on. Absolutely. And again, that brings us to the end of episode 3 of the Coarse Grind podcast. My guest this evening has been Ms. Natalie Slater of BaconDestroy.com, author of Bacon Destroy, and seriously, all around, if I wasn't just, infatuated before, I sure as hell am now. So thank you so much again. BaconDestroy.com. Check it out. My producer is Johnny Robinson. I am Sean Rossler, creator of the Coarse Grind podcast. We will talk to you soon. Take care.